one thing that we did bring up last week on the podcast that we're going to now bring to fruition, and this is a thing that I'm very interested in myself, and was a big driver for us actually getting together and actually getting to talk, because as you probably picked up, that Geoff has done a bit of game development, and he was very, I believe it was the Nickelodeon-based games were the main thing that with the studio you're working with, which is THQ Australia at the time, if I'm not mistaken.
THQ Studio Australia. Yeah.
So now going forward, and especially tonight, which I'm quite excited about, is that we got. Trust me, this is something that I wanted to hear about for ages, but you don't think anyone's interested. But trust me, people love this shit, and if it's good enough for me, it should be good enough for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I actually probably have in my archive somewhere footage of the studio itself when it was first founded, and we started in Brisbane on Astor Terrace in a small studio. The first game we produced, in 2004, it was released. So we started in 2003. So this little studio, we a lot of studios that they called satellite studios, because THQ was a big publisher in America, and a lot of the little studios that were either founded or created were called satellite studios around the world. And at the time, if I'm
not mistaken, like THQ was sort of the one that did like the sort of franchise-based games. Like they didn't do a lot of original type games. Like they didn't produce original games. They did franchise games. Like they were like the LJN of the 2000s.
At the start, at the 2000s. So the God era PS2, like when you could produce anything on PS2 and it would sell. It was like, early 2000s were like everything sold. But in this particular case, so the Australian dollar was like 50 cents to the American. So it made a lot of sense to start a game development studio in Australia. In fact, Pandemic Studios started a game development studio. We had our local one here in Brisbane called Chrome Studios. There was lots of Melbourne studios, Tantalus and whatnot. But THQ Studio Australia, we could have picked our own name, like, Ragtag Studios or something, but we went very specifically with this very corporate name so people would associate the studio with THQ. But the whole idea was to produce quality kids titles, because licensed titles very soon got a name as just churnware, shovelware. So we wanted to produce. They had the Nickelodeon licenses. So when you talk Nickelodeon, you talk about SpongeBob SquarePants, Jimmy Neutron, Avatar: Last Airbender, all those games.
And SpongeBob, for example, and Jimmy Neutron were money titles, like that. No matter what, is going to sell.
They're going to sell. They're popular titles. So 2002, I believe it was. So I'd just come back from London. So I went into I talked about animation earlier, and I went into this whole career in the animation path. But when I came back to Australia, it's going to be a me-centric story. I'm sorry, guys. When I came back to Australia, it was the only animation jobs going were in games. Games were booming in Brisbane, in Australia in general, in 2000, 2002. They were booming. You couldn't really get, there was no film, and I was doing film and TV or TV as music videos. So I drop a few names. Like in London, I was doing like Gorillaz music videos, Robbie Williams music videos, Coldplay music videos.
Wow.
Whole other story.
Geoff, we don't know.
See, this is the sort of stuff that I was intrigued about, because I knew there'd be a lot more stuff that goes like.
It's deep.
This is exactly why I wanted to hear these stories to start with. Wow.
Oh, we're going to start with the game, so we're going to actually skip over.
Robbie Williams is coming up on the next podcast, boys and girls.
All right, I'll go back to music promos and videos.
Games today. Yep.
I didn't even know he did those until right now.
Yeah. So let's jump over, the year, I guess, 2000 to 2002. I come back to Brisbane, Australia, and games is booming. I first got a job when I came back, I organised before I go with a place called Pandemic Studios, which produced, I think in Los Angeles, they did remember Batman Arkham Asylum? I think that was one of the end products before kind of whatever happened to them, but that was an amazing game. They'd really turn the tables in terms of licensed games. But before that, THQ, there was a guy, Steve Dauterman and Roy Tesla, who were both Americans that had come to Australia, and they had affiliations with EA, Electronic Arts, especially in Melbourne, with both of those guys. They both come to Brisbane. They want to start a studio, and I was actually employee hire number 2. The other employee was Dave McMinn, number 1, and they said, we got to produce Nickelodeon titles. Our goal for the studio is producing 1 title every year, which is a team of around about 30 people. And it's all Nickelodeon. I was like, I'm great. I'm an animator. I'm love to lead up the animation stuff. And I actually helped design the first game with David McMinn in my backyard, on my table in the summer heat, fan going. We had to do a Jimmy Neutron game, and so we just designed it ourselves, like 2 of us on that table, and that was Jimmy Neutron, Attack of the Twonkies. So it was a tie-in sort of tentpole game to a Attack of the Twonkies, special that was going on for Jimmy Neutron. And if you're a Jimmy Neutron fan, you probably know what I'm talking about. So we had to do the tie-in game, and there had already been another game created by Chrome Studios here in Brisbane. And I don't want to put disparage on it, but the quality of these games was up in the air.
Can I just interject real quick? Yeah. So you mentioned like you and your mate that were sort of involved in creating that game.
Yeah.
So how did the concept, for example, begin?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I know,
that's a great
I know,
question.
mate. I'm sorry, but this is the thing that I'm interested in. This is why I've been wanting to ask about this stuff for so long. So you don't know about these games that you play. You just think, I just play it.
Okay, so Dave was
these are the sort of stuff that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah.
Like these stories.
Was a designer. He was heavily influenced by GameCube, and in particular Luigi's Mansion at the time. So Luigi's Mansion had this particular mechanic where you sort of draw the ghosts in or whatever with your little thing. So Jimmy Neutron is literally Luigi's Mansion in Jimmy Neutron, where he invented a device that you could sort of upgrade that sucked in these Twonkies and sort of kept them in, and there was a whole sort of push-pull mechanic, which is kind of cool. But based around this story of him bringing back these creatures from another Twonky, this other asteroid planet thing. So we kind of wrote out the storyline, and he knew what he wanted in terms of game mechanics. And we just, we wrote what's called a game design document at the time, and we took that to the studio, and then Steve Middleton came on, who was the art lead who'd worked in UK on all the really sort of some high quality, couldn't tell you what they were, but UK games. And we just formed a studio. We started hiring local people that were into creating 3D assets and programmers and all this kind of stuff. And
you sort of on the ground floor in a way.
Yeah.
When it comes to the whole studio down here, like we talk about, you started bringing people in.
Yep.
So when you came to bringing people in, it was what was the process that went into that? Was it because again, this is early 2000s, so it wasn't the same age that we're living in now. So it wasn't all digital. Everyone knows everyone and this, that, and the other. So how did you approach trying to find local talent?
It was the traditional sort of job advert, looking for people that were into 3D modeling and stuff. Yeah, in the paper, or I'm sure it's Samira, TSMURA. It's a site that still exists now. There was online and digital stuff happening, man, in 2002.
It was, but it wasn't the same as it is now.
Not quite, but there's still, that's
work wasn't the same as
people in the know were on these game sites. Samira, I think it was the name of the site with a T. So we put ads there, and we just get people that were, new, that were into, that a lot of people, juniors that I've worked with since, and I've hired these people many times through different jobs that were 3D artists and programmers and designers and stuff. And we just piled in the local talent, built the local talent, and created this game. And we did this one in 1 year. I don't know what the critical acclaim, Rotten Tomato kind of shit, this Metacritic kind of, probably not great.
The only way to learn what it's like is by playing it. And
exactly.
I'm going to try and get my PS2 emulator to work properly and I'll do a playthrough for you.
Yeah. So
can you check up on the back art as well on post?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
that's one thing. That was our advertising back in the day. It wasn't magazines. It was
That's
like
right. You looked at the back of the back of the cover, but it's a tie-in, so it's already got a market.
Geoff, on Metacritic.
65, which
That's
is
not bad.
probably okay for a kid's game.
and so, for example,
it made money for THQ. So we produced
that's
games.
That's what I was about to ask. Sorry to sort of talk over you. That's exactly what I was about to ask. So the amount do you have a rough idea of how much it costs to produce the game in total, and then how much, like a movie costs this much?
Let's try and put the data on screen here. Let's look it up and see if we can put the data on screen now. But I know that because of the Australian dollar being 50 cents, it was so much cheaper, like half the cost to produce the games. So we were doing games at half the cost of development within a 12-month period, with double the quality in terms of what we were trying to produce. And Nickelodeon loved it. It sold well. We were a money-making thing. So eventually they tried to do 2 games per year. But this game was built. At the end of this game, there was a very tumultuous time for me. Matt probably knows about this. You probably know about this with my previous wife. But I left the studio for 10 months, and then I came back and worked on the end of the SpongeBob game. But that's a different story. I didn't really see a lot of the SpongeBob game. Okay,
I think in saying
SpongeBob's lights, pants.
I think in saying that the next episode we should talk about the SpongeBob game, because that's
I didn't have a lot to do with SpongeBob.
But still got to keep it linear to what
you're
going to, because I don't think you want to swap and change.
Yeah.
But just so everyone's clear as well, with the Jimmy Neutron game, like what was your actual role and what was your day-to-day when it came to making that?
So as I said before, I was an animator. I worked on music videos and whatnot. That was where my interest was. That's why Pixar is such a big influence on me. And I was a lead animator. So I was hired as the lead animator, second person hired in the studio behind the lead designer who worked at Chrome at the time. My intent was, for me personally, was to make the animation in game as close as possible to the series.
I'm going to make myself sound really ignorant.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand so much when it comes to when you say being an animator and being a lead animator.
Yeah.
What does that involve? Is that like trying to make the...
That's just going on. I've got nothing to do here. What's going on?
No, I can talk about Maya and things like that if you want.
Maya. What does that involve, though? Because this is something I find interesting. What does that involve? Like being a lead animator, is that like knowing what they send you, like the...
Yeah, it's keeping...
What the actual character looks like on the show, and then you make it work in a way that translates to the game.
Yes, so there's art. There's a combination of things. So there's art, obviously, and the lead artist takes care of making sure everything looks the same. Animation is making sure the characters kind of act and behave the same as the cartoon characters in the show, and make them believable. So I was looking at the quality of the animation. I was doing all the cinematics that you see. So a lot of the intro cutscenes needed to look like an episode of Jimmy Neutron. With Cindy and all the other characters. So I was in charge of a handful of animators to make sure that we hit the mark in terms of the license for the animation. Art, made sure art looked the same. Game design is a totally different thing. So one of the most interesting aspects of this was we went to LA for a recording session with the artists that do the voices for Jimmy Neutron, this sort of small lady that did lots of different voices. So we didn't run the session. We were there to make sure that we got everything that we needed for that session. They flew us to LA to do that, and I've spoken directly to Mark Hamill on a different game. That's another story.
So there we go. And if I'm not mistaken, you said you've actually got like some stuff saved on film, like of like those days and things along those lines. Am I not?
Yeah, I can flash a few things up, but
but for example, you've got video, correct?
Yep.
okay, like I would speak for, I think, for everyone to say, like, we can make a Pressing the Points podcast extras channel where if you've got just footage that you want, that because I want to see it, and I'm sure that everyone else that finds this interesting is going to want to see it as well, and you've got it sitting there stockpile. I think that is something that I'd really like to see, because I find this stuff fascinating myself. I know I'm fanboying to Geoff.
Yeah, we'll put a little appendix video.
Can you just edit that out? I don't want to be heard by saying I'm fanboying.
No, I heard it. I've got a local recording of that.
No,
don't break any NDAs, Geoff.
Yeah, there's no THQ doesn't exist anymore, mate.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's actually,
but
there's
maybe
NDAs
some of
with
the
THQ
companies
Nordic,
to which you
Nickelodeon. No,
Marvel.
So we talk. Yeah, no. So that's a totally different story again. So we've got, what Dak is talking about, or Danny's talking about, is just studio footage of people working in a studio, creating a Jimmy Neutron game. So there's as far as I am aware, there's no IP with that, unless the people want.
You could put that behind a paywall and OnlyFans and make Dak pay for it. I reckon.
Maybe. But you look, just to summarize.
I
don't want to go through
the lotion over here.
Put your pants back on. I don't want to go, but I want to summarize and sort of finalize that game. So that game was built over a 12-month period. Lots of talented people in Brisbane that have gone on to good and great things, everywhere from Blizzard to God knows where they are right now. That was a bit of a 12-month period and released sort of in 2004 sometime. I can't quite remember. Moderate critical acclaim, not really that great. I mean, it's a kid's game. And there's not a lot of stories about it. We just put our heads down and got to work to get that delivered by the deadline, and we did it. And that was the first game of THQ Studio Australia.
Well, I'm looking forward to 100% hearing again the flow-on effect and how it all kept on the ball rolling. And
we grew.
Back to this day, like you're now, like you're starting to get back into that sort of thing. So it's been obviously a lifelong career that you've been able to make, and the curveballs I wasn't expecting with the Robbie Williams music videos, like being in London, like that's obviously going to be a story, for God's sake. Where's all this been my whole life, like with Geoff?
I don't know, because my relationship to you guys is literally Donkey Kong, right? But my history is really with games and animation, and it all stems from arcades, really, and cartoons.
So going on from that, I'm also looking forward to seeing where this end of the sort of stream goes going forward, because that was quite interesting to me. I have to say, and there's a lot of things I want to deep dive in that, but I'm like, yeah, we can.
I think some games we could probably combine into one episode. We don't want to go on forever. But there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, probably at 4, 5 or so episodes where I can say something about a new game topic, and then we can go back to
100%
animation.
So I feel at this point in time, we're sort of getting to the point of wrapping things up.
These.
So, yeah. Again, spoiler alert, that's a bit of a series that he might have worked on.